Welcome back to another episode of DreamHack Tonight. Nahaz, you're here. We're talking game development today and everything we've got going on with game developers and publishers at DreamHack Beyond. Let's just start us off. What do you know about the game development process so that, we kind of know where we're starting this conversation today?
Well, my interest, by now, and most of our viewers are going to know by now that I'm an econ professor. That's my full-time job, and my interest in the industry is more from the business standpoint. And I actually think it's in a fascinating place right now because you're talking about an industry that for 15, 20 years operated according to basically one model where you had AAA publishers putting out basically everything, and the big discussions were console versus PC or first party versus third party. And there was a big movement then toward digital distribution and this idea of games as a service. So rather than paying $60 for a disc or cartridge, you were going to pay a monthly fee. All of a sudden, along come indie games. And we're at the point right now where the industry has gone from one economic model that completely dominated for decades to now we're not sure what the modal game development model is even going to look like in 10 years. So it's a really exciting time. I feel like a lot of different players in the industry are pushing against each other. There's a lot of competition in places that we've never seen it before. It makes for a really exciting time, I think, for a lot of the people working in and around these development studios.
And what's wonderful is we as the consumer get an infinite more choice now. And we get to see games like Valheim, Among Us, Fall Guys, really sort of come out of nowhere. And, it is E3 week, it's Game Showcase, it's Xbox, Bethesda, everybody else showing off all their big AAA titles. And that's the way it used to be. And those were the games we were going to get, and you planned your Christmas vacation around them and your shopping list. Now we have... still do, but now we have this whole new world to explore. And I don't know, one of the hardest things is how do you find these games? Because they don't usually get their big showcase. Well, conveniently, let me just segue to talk about, DreamHack Beyond, that event that we keep bringing up. We're doing something really cool. So, Nahaz, I know you've been to DreamHacks before, but in a talent side of things and not necessarily in a whole festival thing. So for people who haven't been, or if you have a refresher, we have this big indie showcase. We call it the Indie Playground, where all the developers who can make it to the show come and they have demos and you get to talk to the developers and figure out the game. But we've always been regionally limited because they're an indie developer and they have to be able to afford to come. Because DreamHack Beyond is digital and global, we're doing something really cool where we have content partners. We've got Bit Summit, we've got Digital Dragons, we've got DevGam, we've got all of these different other indie game showcases that happen throughout the world. Brazil, Poland, I believe Russia and Japan, and I have to look at the list, that are going to know they're indie developers and they're curating and gathering them so that they can be shown off and beyond, so that people can go in and find playable demos for games from around the world. And I'm so excited for this because I never know how to find indie games. And now someone else is curating them for me.
No, it's a huge opportunity. It's been thrown around for years. When is there going to be a Cannes Film Festival for gaming? And it's funny. I've always thought that that's kind of the wrong question because even in films, the general public is still really not all that aware of a lot of the films that get shown there, even despite the name being famous. But for games, you're talking about a venue where we can showcase a lot of different titles and where, people can pick up and play some of these titles right away. I think that's really exciting because, more and more, I think every gamer, it's not idiosyncratic to me now that I can say some of my favorite titles in the last few years have been indie titles. I think anybody that games any significant amount of time can say that. And that's such a divergence from what we had going on as recently as 10 years ago.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Valheim and Godfall were the two that instantly come to mind for me that I loved, just to the moon. But so DreamHack Beyond, you can check out dreamhack.com/beyond to find all the info, what our indie playground's going to look like. We'll also have publishers there showing off their games. There's going to be free to play events for games that you get to play for free for maybe a day to test them out and see if you want to try them. There's going to be a ton of games on sale through our Steam events so that you get easier access to them. And then there's going to be demos of new stuff and trailers and maybe a few announcements. You'll just have to tune in to find out. But one of the coolest things that we get to do, because we are DreamHack and we do love game development, is talk to game developers and show off how games come together. So we've got someone from a different side of the industry than maybe you're used to seeing on this channel, but welcome to DreamHack Tonight. Welcome onto the show, Paul Tessmann, who's a game system designer at Tripwire. He was formerly working on Heroes of the Storm at Blizzard. How you doing, Paul?
I'm doing right. How are you doing? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing great. We get to nerd out about video games just like we do every week. So I think Nahaz is pretty happy, if I had to take a guess.
Oh, I mean, our hit rate for finding topics that I can just nerd out about has been glorious so far. This is one where I feel like I know a little bit more maybe than some of the like I know a little bit more about game development than I do about cosplay. But this is something where my knowledge of the industry is going to be very different from Paul's experience working in the trenches on a day-to-day basis. And I confess I've always been curious in the last few years as the picture has changed so much for somebody like me who's on the outside of the industry looking at business models. I'm really curious, how have things changed in the last 5 or 10 years in the industry for somebody on your end of things?
Well, as far as development goes, things haven't changed too drastically because at the end of the day, we're just trying to make content and make video games, right? The main difference seems to be at the high level of like the targets that they're aiming for. Like you're talking about games as a service, free to play games, now with things like Genshin Impact, gacha games, things of that nature, just different monetization methods. That being said, there still are a number of companies that release, like, I guess what you could call a regular title. Like id still just released Doom Eternal. We released Maneater last summer. Star Wars, Fallen Order, things like that. Like there are still a number of companies that release amazing single player, like complete experiences that you don't have to worry about like accidentally spending an infinite amount of money on. But as a developer, like the short answer is things really haven't changed. We just make content, and it's fun regardless of what it is.
So your title is game system designer, and I would say that for people on our channel who are used to watching us, we are typically talking to maybe somebody who's doing the art or someone who's writing the narrative. So your job title is a little different. So if you could describe that for everybody watching to help kind of orient them, I think that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, sure. Systems designer is kind of a confusing term because it's not as straightforward as, say, a combat designer or an audio engineer, stuff of that nature. But what a systems designer does is basically we kind of come up with the underlying rules of how we want to implement things. So, for example, when we worked on Maneater, I was responsible for our bounty boat system. Where basically as you terrorize people on beaches, naturally they're going to get very upset and the Coast Guard's going to show up at some point and try to hunt you because they don't want you to do that. And so I had a large hand in developing like the different weapon tiers, the different boat tiers, how they're balanced, what knobs are available. And then I'll work with the engineers to make sure all of those things are available for other designers to tweak. As well as working with artists to make sure that all of their assets are working, audio people, same type of thing. So I kind of work, I don't want to say I work behind the scenes, but there's a lot of under the hood stuff that I get to do.
So it's building the framework. Yeah, so I want to like create an analogy here and see if I'm understanding it right to make sure I'm following. So you're building the framework that things get plugged into.
That's a good way of putting it, yeah.
Okay, cool. Sorry.
So how much actual, are you writing actual code, or are you more interfacing with the people that are that are putting the nuts and bolts together?
So I'm kind of in a special place just because I do have an engineering degree. So I do have some experience diving into actually writing code or script for our game, because Unreal Engine is based in C++. So if you know how to code, then you can make new stuff for the engine. But generally speaking, designers will work on the system, like inside the toolkit itself to make assets. There's still some level of scripting in what they call Blueprint, but it's a visual scripting base. So it's something that's very easy to learn and pick up, but at the same time, it's still almost as deep as being able to do code.
But do you feel like somebody that's going to do the job that you've been asked to do, do you feel like you really have to have that coding background to have an appreciation of what's possible within the parameters of the engine when you're mapping things out in the gameplay? Like you're mapping out a progression scheme for the player is how I understood you answering the first question. How crucial do you think the actual coding background is when you're thinking about that as a problem?
Not really at all, because the type of stuff I do is more like Reinessa was saying, just kind of the framework for the big picture of things. And so the code doesn't come into that as much. It definitely does help, because then you can speak more clearly with engineers and make sure that your requirements are more specifically called out. But most of the other designers I work with don't have any experience in code. It's more about logic flow and things of that nature. So that's the type of thing that you don't need to know, like C++ syntax, but you could understand, an if-then statement.
But the real reason that I was so excited about this conversation is you do something which is very, very big picture oriented, but you have experience doing that with very different titles. So you've worked on a game like Maneater, which is a dedicated single player experience. The progression is very much traditional, versus you've also had some work on a game like Heroes of the Storm, which is completely different. How does the job that you're doing differ depending on the type of game that we're talking about?
At the end of the day, it just kind of boils down to the different systems that go into the game. And granted, I wasn't a systems designer on Heroes of the Storm. I was what they call a technical designer, but it was more just a generic content design. But I mean, even a systems designer on Heroes would be more about defining, say, for example, when catapults come out, like in Dota, where they come out every couple of waves, things of that nature. So it's more about you're still working within the bounds, like the bigger picture of the rules of the game. You're just kind of developing different parts of it, or rather coming up with the rules for different parts of it to kind of gel together and make sure they like make cohesive sense.
It almost sounds like you're the board game designer, and then somebody else says, this is what the pieces look like. This is like what the map looks like given these set of rules. It's interesting. I mean, I see it, what looks like a lot of board games behind you. So where I'm going with this is I want to know how you ended up here, because when you talk to someone in the gaming industry, they came from all over the place, and there's very few degrees that design for it. So what was your path? Like, how'd you get to this point?
Sure. So I kind of fell into it a little bit. Basically, as I said before, I went to college for a computer engineering degree. And being from Michigan, naturally, I went into automotive because that's kind of what Detroit's about. Realized I didn't really like it and started just looking around for different jobs that I could get into with my level of experience and background. And there was a small indie studio down in Austin called King's Isle that was hiring engineers, and I got an interview with them, and I guess I did a good enough job because they hired me on. So that was my foot into the door. Unfortunately, being an indie studio, they had laid off a number of people not too long after I started there, and kind of had to start over. But at that point, like, I realized I was more interested in design because I'd actually been kind of like writing rule systems and stuff like that since I was a kid. Like, I used to play Dungeons and Dragons, like most people did, and I actually and actually kind of found myself like making hybrids of like Dungeons and Dragons rule sets with like Final Fantasy 1, where there was like advanced classes. This was before advanced classes actually existed in Dungeons and Dragons. But like you could have a fighter that would upgrade into a knight or maybe a paladin or something of that nature. and just kind of coming up with ways to make that actually make sense, and the abilities they would have, like how they would play. And that's kind of the core, again, of being a systems designer. And so eventually I started working at Blizzard. I started just by making content in the StarCraft engine, because Heroes of the Storm is basically based on a modified StarCraft engine. And so I made some characters from League of Legends in there. Ended up doing well enough that, again, that they brought me on and liked what I did. So started working there for a while. Did a variety of things, characters, map scripting, and then ended up working on the brawls, which is our kind of our fun free-for-all type stuff. And then eventually got hired on here just because I was tooling around in the Unreal Engine and they needed somebody with my kind of experience.
Now, okay, I'm going to use you to make a little bit of a point here. I hope you don't mind, but what I hear you saying is actually related to something that I talked to some of my undergrads about, and that's that I think a lot of people, when they look at jobs or an industry from the outside in, they think of it as, I need to learn to do X. I need to take Y and Z courses. Whereas when you talk to people that have been in an industry, especially like gaming, what you do changes so much over time. And your general logical skills and getting better at what you're doing are more important than any one particular class. So it's really been cool for me listening to how your job description, as it were, has changed so much as time has gone on.
Yeah, and you're 100% correct. It's not about like actually specializing in one kind of thing actually almost works as a detriment, because then you're kind of pigeonholed into doing that one thing. Whereas I've been fortunate in being able to do a variety of different things that makes it so that I can field all kinds of stuff. And I do that now, where I'm kind of the go-to guy for the audio and engineering folks. They ask me if for system stuff, but then they also talk about like balance things. I'm working with a combat designer to help with that. And kind of going back a little bit, you don't really need to have like an engineering degree or a video game degree or anything like that into video games. You just need to be very passionate about it and like grab an engine. There's a bunch of free engines out there, Unreal 4, Unity, even like if you want to mess around in the StarCraft engine or some kind of other map maker, any of those are available and are free. And just the number one thing that we look for when we're reviewing applicants are stuff that they've done. If they can show us that they know what they're doing inside the engine and that they are doing it because 100%. They enjoy it, that will carry you much farther than a piece of paper saying that you went to school for 4 years.
What was the change like for you early on? So you, if I heard you right, you went from going from working with a pretty small indie shop, jumping right into Blizzard, which is this huge organization. What was that change like for you? And do you have sort of a preferred team size that you like to work in?
Sure. It is, as you might expect, pretty jarring going from a small like indie studio. I think they were less than 100 people at the time, up to the mega giant that is Blizzard. But even then, like Blizzard kind of segments their teams by project. So the Heroes team is separate from the Diablo team, is separate from the WoW team. And so while there's still, several hundred or thousand of us on campus at any given time, we're all in different buildings working on different projects. So it almost kind of feels like you're, little isolated capsules inside of a big machine. That being said, there is still a different feel about it. There's a lot more people, there's bigger events, there's clubs, things of that nature. And so there's a lot more of a societal, like community-based aspect around Blizzard that I kind of enjoyed because, like we had a game club, so we played board games every week. There was a volleyball court, so there would be people out there playing volleyball a day. There was boot camp, so there's people doing CrossFit and things of that nature, flipping tires. And that's the kind of thing that you obviously don't get at a small company, but the inverse, now I work at Tripwire, which is a small company again. I think we're still around 90 people. You get to work more closely with everybody and kind of get to know everybody at the office a lot more closely. You don't see as many strangers because, you're in the same area with everybody every day. And so it's kind of a more tight-knit, it's not as huge, but it's a more tight-knit group, I would say. So both have their pros and their cons. It's just kind of dependent on what you're looking for.
Do you find that you get less bored with a smaller team because you have more, like, are your fingers in more things because the team is smaller?
Yeah, I don't know if I would say I get less bored, but I definitely wear more hats. Is probably how I would word it. Like you're saying, there aren't as many people to accommodate all of the different things that we're doing, so I have to flex a lot. Sometimes, like, if I'm making a new ability for a character or something, we might not have the bandwidth for an artist to make me effects, so I'll just whip something up myself. And that's given me a lot more experience in different aspects of the engine that I would have had at Blizzard, where we always had one or two people that were kind of dedicated to it, and so we would just go bug them. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask another kind of nebulous question and see what you can do with this one. One of the things, as I talked about in the open, that really interests me is how the different models have changed. How, it's not always the AAA title where here's the content, boom, and there may be patches, but the game is finished. There's DLC. There's free-to-play models. There's how does the content delivery mechanism that the publisher has opted for affect your job? Would you rather be working on the big AAA title with all the crunch time that comes before the release date, or would you rather be working on the DLC, or would you rather be working on like a free-to-play or subscription title where there's little trickles of content coming out over time? How do you see that from your end?
Well, I'd honestly say that even for studios that are working on a more release-based basis, with like singular titles and DLC packs and things of that nature, they're ultimately still trying to keep us all making stuff on a regular basis, right? If we're sitting idle, they're just spending money for no gain, which obviously is not what businesses want. So even though we aren't releasing stuff on an as regular a cadence as we would in a free-to-play game or a transaction-based game, they typically still want us working on stuff, and so they'll find things for us to do. That being said, the type of thing that we work on obviously would be different at that point. For free-to-play stuff or like content release type stuff like Heroes or League of Legends of that nature, it would be more small, like add-on content typically than huge significant chunks of stuff. So like we might work on a new character or a new skin or new abilities and stuff like that, as opposed to working on like a whole new area with whole new enemies and whole new mechanics. Like when say Doom Eternal and its DLC packs, they're working on whole new zones with some new enemies, new bosses, new storyline content, versus, like I said, on Heroes, we'll make a new character, and sure, they'll have new abilities, but it's not as drastic of a difference usually.
One of the things that you brought up briefly when we were just briefly introducing ourselves off camera, you mentioned that you'd actually worked on a title that didn't end up seeing the light of day. And I kind of wanted to ask you about that. Like, what happens to these titles that don't make it through? How does it feel to work on them? And is it different now in the industry where it's actually a thing? Some of these titles that don't make it at the AAA houses go on to become successful indie titles. I really want to hear how that's affected what you do.
Well, so there's a lot to be said for that. So the project that I was working on was an MMO that was more based around mini games and kind of a communal, like finding activities and finding friends and doing stuff. It was, I don't want to say it was like Animal Crossing, but it was kind of in that vein where you're just like exploring and you're having fun with your buddies, and then you'll play some mini games to collect resources and build furniture and stuff like that and make a house. And so, obviously it's dispiriting if something that you're working on doesn't get to see the light of day. Like it's going to suck no matter what industry you're in, right? But sometimes they are able to kind of salvage parts of it and make new things out of it. I mean, that's how Overwatch came to be, right? They started with, I think the game's called, they started with Titan, I think it was called, and realized that the original iteration wasn't working out, reworked it into Overwatch, and now it's a big thing. But Sorry, could you repeat the second part of the question? So I didn't want to get sidetracked, but there
It
was a
was
lot there.
more the presence of indies and the possibility that some of these, you might be working on something that be part of a team that's working on something, as you described at a bigger company, and that project gets axed. And we've actually seen examples where then the people that are making that game leave and go develop that game on their own. Is that ever something that's been on your radar?
I haven't had experience with it personally. I mean, there was a number of people who left Blizzard after our round of layoffs that have formed their own studios now. So I imagine that was probably due to that type of thing. I obviously, like I said, I can't speak to it just because I'm not involved with any of those studios or those people directly. But yeah, obviously it still happens. But that's one of those things, right? Like eventually businesses kind of get to the point where they're about making money, making new content for the things that they think are important, and then if the creative minds disagree, then they'll branch off and make their own thing. I think that's how Respawn got started too. The guys from
Absolutely.
Infinity Ward got tired of being under that business type situation and formed their own studio. So
and
yeah,
it's not necessarily a new thing in the industry, right? That's something that went on before the current era of indie titles. But it's fascinating to me because some of these ideas that haven't necessarily survived the AAA publishing model do end up getting ported and becoming highly successful, $20 or $30 indie releases. And I think it's something that digital distribution and that consumer awareness at different price points has really helped out a lot.
Oh, absolutely. And like, I think even Maneater was only a $40 game. So like even fairly large releases are kind of going the way of recognizing how much content that are delivering and pricing accordingly. Because like Maneater, you can beat and clear within maybe 10 hours. And it's, some people might say that's...
I'm very slow. That's like 60 hours easy.
To be fair, I think I'm like the second fastest runner of Maneater in the world. We actually like had a speedrun competition last fall.
Amazing.
But yeah,
I'm an anti-speed runner.
Oh, that's fair.
Yeah,
I mean, hey,
I have to do everything on the map.
That's not my problem. My problem is I play it once a week, so I forget how to play by the time the next week rolls around. Okay, so this is gonna be a side tangent here, but what games really need is the I have 8,000 other things I'm doing and can only play you every so often option, so that there's a tutorial every time you load the game. Would you like a reminder? Yes, please. That's what I need.
Well, I mean, yeah, I could see that. That would definitely be useful in some situations. But it's definitely got to be an opt-in thing, because I think we actually had a bug.
Oh, yes.
I think that was actually a bug in Maneater for a while, where it would just give you the tutorial prompts every single time you open the game. And it's just like, after the first couple of times, it's like, oh, geez, please stop.
Can I have that build?
I'll see what I can dig up for you. I'll definitely check. I'll put a note in.
But it's a cool thing, though, to talk about game length and then changing the game price. There was this tweet that went viral maybe a month or so ago of a game that was less than 2 hours to complete. And people were buying it, saying it was awesome, and then returning it on Steam because of the Steam return policy. And there are all these people saying, let's normalize cheaper, shorter games, because not every game needs to take 100 hours.
Yeah, and I completely agree. Like, as an adult with a career and, responsibilities, I actually lean towards games that I can pick up and put down within an hour or two. It's just easier to fit into my lifestyle now. And I think that's a lot of games that kind of move towards that. Like, that was one of the major goals with Heroes, and not to knock Dota, but like, so Dota, commonly the games will get up to 40, 50, 60 minutes. And like, if you only had, a lunch break, that's your entire lunch break on one game, maybe, assuming it's even done by then. And so Heroes specifically intended to try and make sure the games would end within a half an hour. Overwatch, same type of thing. The games are meant to be very short. You can pick up, play a game, feel like you got a full experience, and be done all within, again, I think 20, 30 minutes. And so I think I definitely think that there's a place for shorter games and games that you can kind of find checkpoints at while still remaining accessible so you don't get lost. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I thought I had a second point there, but I just kind of like trail off.
No, I like that.
I just think I think it's interesting because we've got, games coming out at $60, $70 price point. The AAA price point's going up, and Diablo 2 Resurrected is $40. Mm-hmm. And some people are like, wow, that's kind of expensive. And I'm looking at it going, it's a Blizzard game that's not $60. I don't know. I'm kind of impressed. I think they really were moderate there.
Well, I mean, they definitely got to reuse a lot of the stuff, and I think it's one of those things of like, I can't speak to knowing exactly what their pricing scheme is, but like I imagine they realize that like it's a smaller team, it's a smaller project, and it's a game that's already been released once. People would probably be pissed if they tried charging $60 for it. So let's ease it at 40. And there's probably a collector's edition for the people that do just want to go all in and get the fancy stuff too. So people can.
Let's be real. Diablo 3 had been better received. It'd have been 60 for sure.
That's a good point. Well,
maybe.
As
the economist in the room, the $40 price point is at least partially a, hey, we hope you guys will still buy Diablo 4.
I mean, it's entirely possible that is the case, but like I personally feel Reaper of Souls kind of fixed it by, I mean, the game became a lot more interesting and accessible to people.
No,
and
I do agree with you, by the way.
Yeah. No, and
I don't want to jump on Blizzard too bad.
No, you're fine. And you know, there's still a lot of good people working at that studio, so I don't want to jump on them either.
Absolutely.
I mean, I've had my rants about decisions they've made, but like, let's be real, Diablo 2 is my favorite game. It will always be my favorite game. I will always go back to it. And so I don't it's hard, but I'm just like, I don't care. I don't care what price tag they put on it. I'm gonna buy it. And they have that. I mean, now as you're sitting there talking about models for pricing models and structures and game styles and everything now, and let me tell you, nostalgia is another model that people use. Final Fantasy VII remake. I mean, isn't Demon Souls a remake? Don't we have like the last 2 or 3 years has just been recycled? I mean, they're
remastering all of the Final Fantasies. There's a lot of talk about, you know, what's the difference between a remaster and a remake and how much it really is interesting, because Final Fantasy VII is a fascinating example of a game that I was very skeptical of. That was one of the formative titles of my youth. Part of me was reluctant to revisit that experience, but then you play it and you're like, I mean, this is a miracle. It captures so much that I remember that made me nostalgic about the first one, but it feels completely fresh. And so it's just yet another model that gets added to the table of what you can do in gaming. Whereas 20 years ago, it was pretty much there were 1 or 2 different development paths that you followed, and now there's like 30. Yeah.
And I think
one thing I did want to ask you, Paul, real quick, was we are in E3 season. All the big shows are going on. Have you ever, or have you had somebody close to you in the industry that experienced one of these releases or reveals that you had a lot personally invested in, that you were really on the edge of your seat in terms of like great success or great failure, how the public was going to respond to this?
You mean as an actual creator or as a fan?
Both. Well, as a creator is my primary interest, but I will take the fan answer. I'm curious about that too.
Sure. I mean, as a creator, like Heroes of the Storm, we launched it we announced it at BlizzCon because that's how Blizzard rolls. And you know, I was in the audience wearing my we had Heroes of the Storm shirts made for us. They're fashioned to look like jerseys basically. And so I was sitting out there in the audience with my friends when they were announcing it on the big screen, and people just lost it. And it was the most like relieving experience, like most fun experience I think I've had as a game developer, just like hearing fans really excited for stuff that you're making. And you know, the game did pretty well and kind of trailed off a bit, which is unfortunate, but that's how it goes, right? Like, I think we tried to diverge a little too much from the given MOBA formula, and that kind of lost a lot of player base that they were originally trying to capture. But you know, at the time it was great. It was exciting. Like there was a lot of stuff going on around it, a lot of events. Like we did the Heroes of the Dorm things. You know, there's a lot of fun stuff with it, and it was a lot of fun. As a fan, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just, you continued the fan one. That was a success. I have a failure follow-up question to ask,
okay,
but
sure.
we can stay happy.
Sure. I just as a fan, and this is kind of a niche game, but there was just an old series called River City Rampage, and
Oh my
they
God.
announced, yeah, they've been like
Wow.
quietly working on sequels for that for years. It's just they never really came out in America because the series didn't, I guess it didn't stick over here as well as it did over in Japan. And they had announced another release of it. I think it was called Tokyo Rumble for the 3DS. And it was a 2.5D but with sprites, and it's still like, it felt like the old games but, you know, enhanced for the modern age with, you know, time events and things of that nature. It was kind of neat because like I was excited for the game, and I was walking through I was actually at that E3 when they were kind of showing it off, and I was walking through with my River City Ransom shirt, and one of the developers happened to see it. He's like, "Hey, you're a fan of the game?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm gonna head over to the booth whenever I can." And so he gave me this like autographed postcard from the like I think it was the translation
awesome.
team at the company. I still have that somewhere in my locker box somewhere, so that's been a high moment. That was always fun.
I don't think that, it's funny that you brought that up, because that's one of the games I don't think that gets enough credit as one of the very early examples of a lot of the sort of game ideas that have influenced JRPG evolution. You know, some of the things that you see even recently in a game like Persona 5 date all the way back to that era of gaming, and I think it's kind of cool how a lot of those ideas have been iterated on. Anyway, that's too geeky. But
You're fine.
So, I mean, I haven't heard of this game, so that's a great point, is that, you know, I have no idea what you're talking about. A game that I think everyone has heard of, and we're talking about, everyone gets really excited and there's this wonderful reaction. I really do. I know it's been beat to death a little bit, but Cyberpunk. This big article came out after it released that said that they were building the game at the same time the engine was being built. And so many times during this conversation, you've spoken about, oh, we were working within the engine parameters, we were using the assets, we were right of an established Unreal 4 engine. And I really just want to drill down on, what does game development look like when the engine is being worked on at the same time as the game?
I mean, I think it's a much more common thing than that article may have made it sound. Like working in an engine, like basically the way game development works is we'll do stuff and make new content until we hit a wall or some kind of limitation, and then we'll poke a tools engineer or gameplay engineer and be like, hey, this is what we're trying to do. Can you add this functionality? And then usually they'll say no at first until they say, no, we really need it, please. And then they'll, you know, find some way to make it work. But yeah, so like it's a lot of kind of pushing the bounds and finding out if the thing that you're making isn't working because of something you did or because the engine doesn't allow it for one reason or another. That's been the most like prevalent thing I've run into.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think, I think that
ahead.
answer is illuminating for another reason, and that's that you take that process that Paul just described, and now imagine doing that and saying, oh, and by the way, it has to work on the PS4, the PS5, the PC, the Xbox One, the Xbox XS, the blah, 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 blah. And
the fact that you got that many Xbox consoles was impressive.
It's an order of magnitude increase in the complexity. And I think that the cross-gen development hurt Cyberpunk, I think, a lot more than any other title. But again, you know, some of that is just speculation.
Yeah, and it's highly possible that you're right about that, because like even we had issues trying to get the game like Maneater for as small of a game, relatively speaking, as it is to Cyberpunk. We were kind of scrambling at the last minute to get the game running at a reasonable frame rate consistently throughout, you know, high action sequences when there's a lot of particle effects and enemies and stuff going on. So like consoles are, I don't want to say the bane of my existence, but like they are a lot of work. You are absolutely right in thinking that like porting stuff to different consoles is a monumental task, and the teams that do that work are really, really talented people.
And patient, probably patient.
And very patient, yes.
Yeah.
All right, well, you're a very talented person who, as you said, has lots of different hats to get back to, so we don't want to keep you for much longer. I just want to say, I know you stream, I know you're on Twitter, I know people can come find and ask you these questions themselves and come experience this journey with you, so let everybody know where they can find you and find out more about what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. I'm on Twitter at the Daneslave because my normal handle was taken. Twitch is just Daneslave. I usually play Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays of different genres. Mondays a PC game of some sort. Wednesday I've been playing a lot of Nintendo 64, and then Fridays is like Game Boy Advance games. So I run the whole gambit. Like I'm a big retro game nerd, and yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff there and a lot of games from my childhood that I still enjoy. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I mean, this was very fascinating. Like I said, we haven't had someone in this role on our DreamHack show before. So hopefully everybody learned a whole bunch. And I can't wait to see you like at a physical DreamHack, and we can nerd out about all this and play board games. It's going to be great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. It was a lot of fun.
That was fascinating. Absolutely. Fascinating.
Yeah, it really is neat to talk to somebody that's been in the trenches in the industry and in a couple of different places, because the view from outside the industry has changed so much, and the view from inside the industry has changed, but in completely different ways. Yeah. But there really are still a lot of opportunities. I get excited even for little blurbs when we can talk about, because I know there are a lot of people out there that have an interest in working in some of these jobs. Mm-hmm. And I think I really did worry 5 or 10 years ago that the gaming industry was going to be a very rough career path for a lot of people. And I still, it still has its problems, but I think this is an industry that you can plan a career in with a lot of confidence now.
What I really love hearing is, so I was out the other day and I was talking to someone actually, and when I said I worked in the gaming industry, they said, "Oh, do you make games? Are you a programmer?" And that's the first thing someone always asks is, "Oh, are you a programmer?" And it was really nice to hear that. From what it sounds like a very small percentage of people are actually programmers, because engines are already built for you and you're not sitting there writing code, you're using tools, and programmer training helps with the thought process. But there's so many roles. The producer role, which is basically the person that coordinates all the different departments. There's art departments, there's audio engineers, there's people who are balancing mechanics and everything that, not necessarily are writing code. And that's a huge section of the industry that people don't realize is there.
And I think it's a great point, because I don't know if it's accurate to say a small percentage, but it's certainly the case that as time goes on, there are more and more opportunities for people to contribute to game development in ways that aren't just sitting and staring at a screen all day. I mean, I remember, I did a little work with Ubisoft around the time that For Honor released, and I remember like meeting the team that did the motion cap and the guy that coordinated some of the martial arts for that game. There are so many things now that go into these titles, and so many creative properties that are developed at these studios. And you add to that content production is now being recognized as a first order important component of value that a lot of these studios are delivering to their communities. There's going to be, I think, even more opportunity for a very diverse set of people to contribute to the industry in the future. That's part of why I'm really so bullish on it.
Well, thank you everyone for watching. Thanks again to our guest and Nahaz for joining us on this wonderful project. At DreamHack Beyond, you are going to find panels presented and delivered by experts in the game industry. We're talking all levels and different areas of game design and topics and everything. Those panels are going to be accessible, live stream on our Twitch. You're going to be able to get the VODs afterwards for DreamHack Beyond, July 24th to 31st. There's going to be demos. There's going to be sales on games. There's going to be new games to try. There's going to be free-to-play things, devs to interact with and talk to, publishers to see what they're showing and everything. So if you want to find new games, if you want to interface with your favorite games, you want to see devs streaming, streamers playing them on our indie showcase, we're going to have all of it. So DreamHack Beyond, free to play, free to watch, free to join in. all kinds of cool stuff that we're working on curating right now, July 24th to 31st. You can head over to dreamhack.com/beyond to find out more information. Thank you so much for watching this episode. We will have a little look later this week at some games that maybe you should have your eye on, whether released already or soon to be released. And then Nahaz and I will be back next week with another episode with more cool stuff happening at Beyond. Thanks for watching, everyone.